What we're doing here today. Sam will be here in just a moment. He's going to interview me. So you'll get a little bit of kind of the turning of the tables where Sam will be interviewing me. So come on in, guys. Sam is an investigative journalist who actually wrote this book. So the book is called Ravenous, all about Otto Warburg. And so he's going to be here in just a moment. He wanted to interview me. So he's an investigative journalist. Hello, Berkeley, and everyone else. Come on in, make yourselves at home. Sam is an investigative journalist. He teaches journalism and writing at, I think it's Johns Hopkins University. I see Sam just got here, so we will pull him to interview me. I know most of the time when I do these Instagram Lives, it's me interviewing a guest, and I did have Sam on recently to talk about his book, and there is his book, Ravenous. Go check it out. But Sam Apple, what's up, man?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Your lighting is good. Your background's good. You rocking and rolling this thing, man.
Yeah, I've been working on it ever since you told me how awful my lighting was last time.
Well, this is a treat today for my fans because I don't normally get interviewed on Instagram. So the floor is yours. This is your interview. You do whatever you would do. Okay,
great. Well, thank you for doing this. I've never done a live interview before, but I'm a journalist and I interview people, and I've always been curious about you. I don't know much about you even to this day, but when I first became interested in low carbohydrate diets and nutrition, it's at least a decade ago. I don't even remember, but I do remember that you were one of the first names that I came across online. So, you were way ahead of the time. I think everybody appreciates that. So I like to call you the OG. What also struck me is shortly after I discovered you online, I discovered that there were many people online that were extraordinarily mean to you. And, I was kind of shocked. And I think you were ahead of your time in terms of being abused on the internet. And I'm wondering, just as a kickoff question, like, what is it about you that was making these people angry? What do you think?
That is such a good question that nobody's ever asked. So good job right off the bat. Literally nobody's ever asked this. And I noticed it, Sam, like really quick. So I lost 180 pounds in 2004 on the Atkins diet. I started blogging in 2005, podcasting 2006. So it was right around 2006, 2007. I was starting to do a lot of YouTube videos. And I would post the videos, and it would just be educational about low carb diets and some of my experiences. And in the comments, I would see some like really ugly comments. And I'm going, okay, I can either take that personally or I can see it for what it is. And what it was a precursor of what we were about to see with social media, because there was no Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, none of the things that we have now. YouTube was kind of the first one that really kind of some of that hate came out. And I remember just thinking, that ain't about me. It is being said of me, but it's not about me. Those people got issues, but I'm human and it's going to impact me. And so it did for a little bit. And I was married at the time, and she was getting a lot of negative comments about her appearance and, oh, you lost weight, but you didn't lose enough, or you look sickly, you're this, you're that. And so, yeah, that negativity came pretty darn early. What caused it? I think the anonymity, obviously, of the internet made it extremely easy. Plus, I'm somebody that's not afraid to make opinions, and I can make strong opinions. And a lot of people don't like strong opinions. They want you to be wishy-washy. And so one thing that people know about Jimmy is I'm not wishy-washy. I say an opinion, and you can agree, disagree, whatever you're going to do. And I'm okay with disagreement. What I am not okay with is when people like come at you really hard and say ugly personal things. And usually I give them the benefit of the doubt, Sam. I always say, okay, maybe their mama didn't treat them or teach them you don't treat people that way. So I'll always be like, are you sure that's what you say? Because I don't think you meant it as harsh as it came across. And most rational people are, oh, yeah, you're right, sorry. But I think we've just grown this kind of naturalness to come at people because of the anonymity. I'm 6'3". I'm a big boy. I could probably kick most people's ass. So
Yeah.
they wouldn't do that in person. And I've, to this day, only had one person ever come up to me and say something ugly. Most of the time it's keyboard warriors. So
Yeah.
the why is your guess as good as mine. I think it's a lot of people's personal issues, and it's just a projection at that point.
Yeah. And I've heard you say before that you've, developed a thick skin, but does it ever really stop hurting? Does it ever, can you hear like a horrible thing about yourself and just not feel it at all? And I say this in part because, I've written a few books, and
Yeah.
even I developed a thick skin, like every really cruel review still hurts. And I'm just wondering what it's like for you.
Well, I was mentally and physically abused as a teenager. So I have a little more tolerance for so-called abuse now. By comparison, it's nothing like getting my head smashed into walls and punched in the face and being told I'm not good enough and I'm never going to amount to anything and I should just die. Like, those are the things I heard hardwired into my brain as a teenager. And so when somebody says, "Oh, you're fat, you're no good representation of low carb," okay, I hope you feel better, because it didn't make me feel bad. Like, I take great pride in letting them say what they're going to say, and then, okay. And like, it doesn't impact me. I feel like my work is too good. I have too much good to do in my work to get bogged down by that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And your work, I know that you spend a lot of time online, but you say you don't make much money doing it. So are you doing other work as well when you're not promoting low carb?
So this is my job. This is what I do for a living. My primary sources of income are my book sales. And so I've written some of the seminal books in the nutrition world the last decade, the fasting, keto, clarity. So I'm very fortunate that I still get some residual income from that every year. And then I sell sponsors on my podcast. But like, most of what I do is interacting with people for free. I don't try to make a lot of money. To me, it's so fulfilling when you can live your passion and put yourself out there, and then, yeah, pay your bills, and my bills get paid. But for me, the satisfaction of seeing people's lives change and impacting people on a very personal level, that's a legacy that someday when I'm on my dying deathbed, I'm going to go, I'm very happy I lived my life that way.
And in terms of how you live your life, you started, can you tell me when you started the low carbohydrate diet?
January 1st, 2004.
Yeah, okay. And, one of the things I think that makes you so interesting is there are, a lot of people online, a lot of people are promoting low carb, and it seems like an uncomplicated story in a lot of ways. They switch to low carb and they look great and the story's over and it's happy ever after. And it seems to me, from what I've been able to piece together, that your story has been much more complicated and frankly much more real, and often in some ways there have been ups and downs, and you seem to have tried different approaches. Having done this now for over 15 years, are you happy with where you're at in terms of diet nutrition?
As far as the nutrition itself, or the result of that nutrition?
The results, like where you are right now.
So obviously, I feel like, had I not changed at all, had I not found low carb back in 2004, I think I'd be dead today. Honestly, Sam, my own brother Kevin actually did die in 2008. And I would say when Kevin died was when I started putting back on some weight again. And that's not to excuse it, but it's to say that that was such a devastating loss. He was my only full-blooded brother. He had heart disease, diabetes, morbid obesity. He was well over 500 pounds when he died. And he was 41 years old when he died. And so that was hard. And I took it hard. And everybody was like, well, you must have like fell off the wagon and started eating carbs again. I'm like, no, I stayed low carb. But then the stress of that situation made it difficult. So for me, I stay in the game because I don't think I'm atypical. I think I'm typical. I think most people have life stresses that hit them that they deal with this kind of ebb and flow of, oh, okay, well, this thing that was working for me is no longer working in the same way. Let me try this. And so, yes, I've tried different things. Yes, I'm older than when I started, and so that's going to cause me to try different things. I currently am kind of in kind of a keto carnivore, mostly animal foods type of diet, but I'm always tinkering and testing and finding things. A little bit of my problem is I've interviewed all the experts in the world. I'm almost at 1,800 episodes on the Live and La Vida Low Carb show. I've interviewed them all. I know all the information. My problem is distilling down that information for me. And it's something I try to help my followers, the people that listen to my podcast, understand is, okay, you're going to hear a lot of things, but doesn't mean you got to do all of them. You figure out which one kind of work for you. The only way you know is if you test it.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about the stress, and am I right to understand that it's these periods of stress that have led you to regain weight that you've lost? Is that?
That's my theory, along with a little bit of unresolved of the trauma that I dealt with. I found out something right at 2 years ago about childhood trauma that was shocking that I didn't know. And it made so much sense after I learned this thing that came out. And look, I think we live in layers when it comes to our lives. I think we try to compartmentalize that, oh, okay, well, your weight is all about your diet, maybe your movement, and little of anything else. And I think the layers come into play with what you talk about in your work and the hormonal impact of diseases like cancer. There's a hormonal impact of how our bodies respond to specific diets. You could eat the cleanest, real foodist, low carbist diet in the world, and you may still have trouble with your weight and various health things. And what's going on there is you have this underlying stress that's brought on by traumas, brought on by sudden events in your life that make it a little more challenging. And I wish we could give more credence to that about why people gained weight. Look at the last year and a half. A lot of people put on weight, and all that changed was the world was kind of in turmoil and worry over this thing that's been out there. I'm speaking code so you don't get banned on the platforms. But I think we don't give enough credence, Sam, to some of these non-food related reasons why weight can be challenging.
But when you, and I think that's a great point. And when you do get stressed, do you think the mechanism is that it changes your eating behavior, or is it the actual hormonal response to the stress? For
some people, it does drive them to carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, because especially if we were previously addicted to those, it's hardwired that, oh, Little Debbie snack cake always took care of this feeling, Jimmy, so go grab the Little Debbie snack cake. I don't think that's the only mechanism, though. Yes, there's a lot of people that got driven to junk food last year. I think for some people that cortisol may make you eat more energy, even if it's low carb energy, overconsume energy. And maybe that's a mechanism that's going on there. But I think the hormones themselves can actually drive insulin higher so that even those so-called healthy foods that you're eating could store as body fat. And I think this is where we get into trouble, thinking that, well, if you go low carb, all your weight and health issues go away. It's more than that. I think that's a huge part of it, but I think getting a lot of the underlying issues where lifestyle things can come into play beyond diet and exercise. I think sunshine exposure, I think deep breathing and meditation, I think grounding, infrared, we could go down the list of all these things that could be helpful in managing those things, but it's more complex than just the food.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about something then, I have to say for all the listeners that Jimmy told me beforehand that ask anything, and I'm happy to talk about anything. So, I hope this isn't too personal, but it's something I've been thinking bring it. I've been thinking about in terms of myself that, I've written this book about, you're going to show it, insulin resistance and cancer, and the relationship between diet and cancer. And I didn't even really realize when I started, but sort of along the way, I thought like, oh my gosh, like now if I get cancer, it's going to like discredit the entire thing. And, of course that's, it shouldn't because anybody can get cancer no matter what they eat. But now I feel like this responsibility. And I just wonder how you deal with that because people look at you and they say, he's overweight. We're not going to do low carb. Like, how do you deal with that?
You're not the only one. I remember Gary Taubes and I had a personal conversation along that way. He's like, Jimmy, none of us can get cancer, heart disease, diabetes. We're not allowed. It's just not allowed. I'm like, I know. But yeah, obesity, I have a love-hate relationship with it because I know it's labeled as a disease. I know there's the Obesity Society. I used to go to their conferences that when they were called the American Society of Bariatric Physicians, and obesity is a disease. I'm like, no, obesity is a manifestation of insulin resistance, but I wouldn't call obesity itself the disease. But the other manifestations of insulin resistance, I do think you have the propensity for it if you have obesity, like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, PCOS, on down the line. And so for me, my saving grace is I don't have the development of any diseases beyond having the adipose tissue in my belly. That's it. And I want to keep it that way in terms of no other chronic diseases. But yeah, like that's in my mind of, okay, people see me, I'm known for keto clarity, and they're like, okay, you changed my life. And in fact, some of my reviews on Amazon for keto clarity is, beware, the author is fat. It's like, I'm on camera literally all the time doing interviews. It's like, okay, you can see I got a little jiggle. It's okay. Like, but my mental health is good. My heart health is good. Generally, I'm physically healthy at almost 50 years old. I just happen to have extra weight on the body. But we have culturally looked at weight on the body as disease in the body. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. Yes, potential for disease, I will agree. But disease itself, I have no disease. People are like, you're going to keel over of a heart attack. I said, I have a heart scan score of 0.
Yeah.
How? There's no atherosclerotic plaque in there. How will I have a heart attack? I'm not getting it. And so I think it's the imagery of our culture that says fat people are the disease of our society and they must be eliminated. And it's horrible. And last year, this really pissed me off last year with everything that happened with this thing that was out there. People are like, oh, well, if you're obese, you're the one that's going to die from this. And I'm like, okay, yes, if you have other comorbidities related to your obesity, but what if you're experiencing overweight or obese and you have no other chronic health issues manifesting from the insulin resistance? Are you also at this great risk? And the answer is no. And so I had to call out even some of my colleagues in the low carb world that were saying, oh, well, if you're fat, you're going to die of this thing and you need to, okay, but that's not the whole picture.
Yeah, no, I think it's a key point. And I always point out that in my family, we don't store, calories under the skin and subcutaneous tissue. So it goes straight to the visceral fat and we get diabetes very quickly. So, I think that we talked about before that in some ways the extra adipose tissue can be a metabolic advantage, at least to a point. But one just nuance of what you just said, I'm curious about. As you put on more weight, during one of these phases, I know there were no other comorbidities, but do you feel that you actually had more insulin resistance? Did the markers of insulin resistance change, but nothing changed with it? Or were you metabolically healthy in the same way?
Yes, some of the metabolic health markers did shift, but not greatly so. I did notice I had other manifestations of the insulin resistance. I started developing a few more skin tags, and that's kind of a development of insulin resistance. There's little subtle signs that go beyond just weight gain. Weight gain would be one of them. But the triglycerides stay down, the HDL stays up, the inflammation markers stay down, the insulin kind of hovers in that kind of 8 to 12 range. So it's not great, but it's not horrible either. So I mean, you have these subtle changes that happen even in that, you're talking about during the stressful times, right?
Yeah. And this kind of touches on my previous question, but you've really lived in public in a sense, for over a decade and sharing so much of yourself. And even to this day, it's clearly you've changed so many lives, but you continue, to get all this negativity online as well. Do you ever regret the whole experience of making your life public and think I should have just kept this to myself?
Worth every moment. Because look, and I tell people this often, being a health influencer is not healthy. It manifests as weight on my body. Other people, there's a lot of my fellow influencers, they won't tell you this, but they're mentally breaking down. It's just, it's overwhelming. And they can become successful enough that they make enough money off of selling books and programs and whatever they're doing, then maybe they can hire people to shield them from some of that. And I did that a little bit for a few years. But at the end of the day, my brand is I want to touch people right where they are. I want to be the one responding. I want it to be me. I don't want it to be somebody working for Jimmy. In fact, a lot of people will write me a DM. They're like, to the person answering this for Jimmy. And I usually write back, it's Jimmy. No, I have zero, Sam, regrets, because I feel like this was the work I was always meant to do. And I always had a longing in my heart to make a difference in the world. And you can't make a difference in the world unless you piss a few people off along the way.
Yeah. And is there any part of you've been a low carb influencer for many years. And, I know you've talked about, different trends from paleo to keto to carnivore, but it's all been the same mental basic message, I think, about low carbohydrate nutrition.
Yes.
Is any tiny part of you left that thinks, what if it's all wrong? Like, what if this entire message is wrong and that, we really should be eating low fat or whatever it is? Is that completely gone, or is there some part of you?
Look, I have talked to Gary Taubes about this issue as well. And he's like, look, if we're found out to be wrong someday, I'll be the first one to step up and say, look, new evidence has presented itself that blankety blank, whatever the new evidence is, shows that low carb is not very good for your health. But I haven't seen that evidence. And I try to, even though I'm just a layperson, and by the way, I've been offered many times to go get letters after my name, become a doctor, either by PhD or MD. I've been offered various things. I turned them all down, Sam. I like being average, everyday Joe Jimmy Moore, because I feel like I'm relatable this way. If I put doctor in front of my name, immediately it discredits some of that relatability. And so, yes, I might have more head knowledge, but I feel like I've got a lot of good head knowledge as it is, talking to so many experts. But to answer the question directly, absolutely I would change, and I if new evidence presented itself. But I've seen such a preponderance of evidence that shows this way of eating at least has efficacy in terms of the blood sugar and insulin control, which impacts so many chronic diseases from cancer to diabetes to heart disease and on down the line, that I can't believe that would ever happen in my lifetime. But absolutely, I don't worry about it being wrong, because look, they used to think not washing your hands before surgery was a good idea too, until they realized, oops, yeah, we should be doing that.
Yeah. And is there one aspect of it that that you have more doubts about than others, like, certain diets or components of the diet, or is it?
Yeah, and it's evolving even within the community itself. You've got people, very famous people, like this guy back here, Steve Finney, him and Jeff Volek, they have not come out strongly against the vegetable oils, the seed oil.
Yeah.
Got people like myself and others that have looked at the impact that seed oils are having on inflammation levels. It's just bad news. And so there's even disagreement within those of us that have advocated this for a long time. And so that's the kind of thing that, okay, am I right? The seed oil, I think I am, but am I right to kind of point the finger at the seed oils along with the carbs. In fact, in Cholesterol Clarity, I called refined carbohydrates and vegetable oils as the twin evils in your heart health. And I believe that, strongly believe that. But it's not believed universally across the board in the keto world.
Yeah. And related to what we talked about, you living online, I've only sort of started to do that a little bit since my book came out, and I'm doing more publicity, and for the first time in my life, I'm tweeting every day. And I find myself, like so many of us, getting addicted and turning on Twitter and seeing, there's no responses, and feeling kind of let down. Like, I'm wondering if you could ever go back to living offline. Have you has it become a part of your daily life such that you need the response from your audience?
I don't get a dopamine. Well, okay, let me back up. That would be lying. I get a dopamine hit from responses, but like, I walked away from it 2 years ago, Sam. September 1st, 2019. I went away for 6 months where I just completely went offline. I deleted all the social media apps off my phone so I wouldn't even be tempted. I didn't look at it at all. And I thought I would be like you're describing here. I thought I would go crazy because I do live my life so openly online and unabashedly. And I actually enjoy the interaction. But I miss it. Now, when I knew it was about time for me to come back around February of last year, before all hell broke loose in the world, 2 weeks after I came back, but I was starting to get excited about coming back at that point. But when I set that time off of, wow, I could walk away from this, and wow, I'm not as important as I think I am. Because for a while I was like, well, what will happen? People rely on my podcast. No, the world kept going. The world always keeps going. So if I decided today to just up and leave, and no, my fans, please don't think I'm doing that. I'm not going anywhere. But if I decided to do that, I would just shift my attention to other things. Like, I have learned in this life that you plug in where you feel like you can add value. And that's what I do here on social media. I try to do it creatively to the best of my ability. But if I could use the skills I've learned from all this in the real world sector, I would go and do it right now if I felt like I could make just as much of an impact.
And, I know you've alluded to a lot of personal difficulties you've had in the last year and a half or two. Do you think that was caused in any way by being such a public figure, or was that totally sort of unrelated?
It was caused by my public figureness encompassing every part of who and what I was, and it wasn't until all of that was stripped away and all I was left with was my personal stuff that I went, ugh. Jimmy, what are you doing, dude? Like, I realized that I was using the work and the fame and the everything that comes with being online to cover up pain in my own life. And so highly recommend that, by the way, people that kind of get encompassed very heavily in work. Check yourself before you wreck yourself, as the song says, and back away for a period of time. Doesn't have to be 6 months. Back away for a month. Just go completely offline. Watch what happens. It unfolded, Sam, in the first 2 weeks I went away.
Wow. Something that strikes me as really, so moving and poignant about your personal story is, the loss of your brother. I know you spoke about that, and I'm so sorry about that. It's clear that he meant a lot to you, and as I was reading about that background, what really hit me is that you were already at that time sort of a public advocate for low carb and nutrition. I had thought in my mind that that's what started it, but you were actually already out there and trying to connect with your brother, and
right.
You were reaching everybody but the one person you wanted to reach most, it seems. And just wondering what that was like for you, and how you think about reaching the people closest to us.
Well, what actually started it, by the way, was 1999. My brother had 3 heart attacks in 1 week that almost killed him. He was 32 years old, and he did inspire me to make a change. But because I didn't know anything about low carbohydrate nutrition, I went on a low fat diet, ultra low fat diet. And so I did all the low fat everything, and lost a significant amount of weight, over 100 pounds. But I was miserable. I was just feeling crappy. But I was like, he's 32. I'm 4 years younger at the time. I knew I needed to do something or I would be following the same fate. And so it was 5 years later when I found the Atkins diet, and I actually did the Atkins diet because I gained back all the weight from the low fat diet experience. And so, yeah, when I lost the weight in 2004 and then started doing my work online, yes, I was looking at my brother and thinking, man, this could help him. And it was such a drive. And here's the thing, Sam, he did try it. He went on a low carb approach, did very well with it, and was enjoying it. The problem was he started to feel better and he thought he was better and he went back to eating crap again. And I'm going, no, it needs to be for life. And so when he died in 2008, we're coming up on, was it 14 years since he died in October. And it was devastating. And from that point on, everything I have done motivation wise has been to prevent other Kevins out there from befalling the same fate, because it was all preventable. Now, he had other things in his life. He had a crappy wife that was not good to him. So he probably had a lot of that stress that he dealt with. And I have a theory, by the way, when you're insulin resistant, which leads to obesity and all the rest, I think you're also stress resistant, where stress impacts you even more because of your insulin resistance. It makes sense that it would, because the cortisol would make an even more profound insulin response than if you were insulin sensitive. And so I think that's what really sped up his demise. What was your original question? I'm sorry, I got off on this.
Well, yeah, no, that was the question. But I guess, is it, based on my own experience too, I find that sometimes, the people closest to me that I'm inspired to reach don't want to hear from me, because, nobody wants to be lectured by a relative or someone they love, and it's easier to hear from the outside. Are you able to connect with people who are close to you, or does it have to be for people who are a little?
Like my whole family thought I was crazy when I first told them about low carb, and they would see me eat steak with butter, but not the baked potato. And then, yeah, they didn't understand it. Like, how are you getting healthy? But then my mom and my sister, Beverly, they both embraced it. But here's the thing, like, they know I help complete strangers every single day. And so I'm like, call me, just call me. You have a direct access to Jimmy Moore. You turn around and ask a question. And my mom would call me and she'd have like 15, 20 questions, and I'm happy to answer them all. And she's doing great. And then suddenly, Sam, she goes quiet on me, and I'm like, uh-oh, she fell off the diet. She doesn't want to do that. And I remember I'd call her and be like, so how's the keto going? I went off. And I'm like, why'd you go off? Like, let's talk about it. Like, why didn't you call when you wanted to go off? And so a lot of them are still in the diet mentality, but you're right. They're hard to reach. And Dr. Ken Berry talks about it. It's baby diaper syndrome, that if they touched your baby butt with baby powder, that they don't believe anything you have to say. And so for mama, and even my brother Kevin, he probably did that a little bit, even at like 5, 6 years old. Yeah, it's hard. But like, this is why I often tell people, if you have family members that aren't listening to you, I'm happy to call them. Like, I'll get on the phone with them. Yes, Keto Meal Mama says powdered butt syndrome. Yes, that's what it is. That's Dr. Ken Berry's thing. But yeah, I'll call people. They'll be like, will you talk to my mom? She won't listen to me. And so I'll get on there and just say, hey, I've written a few books on this. What are your questions? And, and sometimes they're like, oh, and the person that asked me to call are like, I said the same thing. And they just don't want to listen. But that's just, I suppose that's human nature. You don't want to believe this snotty-nosed kid that you saw growing up years ago.
And speaking of your family, how do they feel about you sharing family stories online and videos and blog posts. Has anybody ever asked you not to do that?
No, directly, no. Uh, well, when I started talking about some of the childhood trauma last year, I came back from the sabbatical. That was one of the big things that I dealt with during my time away was childhood trauma. So when I got back, I was like, okay, keto, you're still important, but childhood trauma, we're going to hit this hard. And I hit the ground running and talking about some of my trauma. And my dad was the instigator of a lot of my trauma. And I got a call from my mom. She said, your dad called me out of the blue. First time since Kevin died in 2008. And he called her 12 years later out of the blue. Something's wrong with our son. He's lying, blah, blah, blah. And so indirectly, yes, he was not happy that I talked about it. But look, it's real life. If we can't relate to people and give them permission to talk about things that might be impacting their weight and health, then what are we doing? I could tell you about keto all day, every day, but if you've got unresolved trauma, that me talking about mine very openly gives you confidence to talk about yours and work that through. I feel like I'm doing my job in helping you get healthy, which is why I started talking about it.
And are you still in touch with your father? Do you talk to him about some of the stuff you've written?
Unfortunately, he cut off all ties with me, has not tried to contact me, and it's probably for the best, obviously. At this point in my life, he had a lot of traumas himself that he never dealt with. I have dealt with mine, and he's very stubborn and narcissistic. I think I've lost that relationship, and it's unfortunate because I would love to have a relationship with him, but I felt like for my own sake, I needed to let that one go. And I'm still open to him coming back, but he's older. I think he's in his early 70s. He's frail. He's probably not going to be with us much longer. Within the next 5 years, he'll probably be gone. And it's unfortunate because he had a hard life. He never dealt with weight problems, but he had a lot of anger issues and medications for psychiatric things and just all kinds of things that he had to deal with. And I feel bad for him now that I'm older. When I was a kid, I didn't know why he was beating me up and mentally berating me. Never mind that his dad was kind of doing the same thing to him, but in an alcoholic state. And so, yeah, like I said, layers, so many layers.
Yeah, I did. And one of the things I read online, I did find that there was, I guess, one moment, maybe after you had, sort of come to national attention with your blog or whatnot, that he approached you and said he was proud of what you were doing. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, it was in his own way. He didn't say it in that many words. I would go visit my aunt, and that's his sister, and she and her husband would just heap praise on, oh my gosh, we can't believe our nephew is famous and and successful. And then my dad would be sitting there and he wouldn't be saying anything. And then his sister, my aunt, would say, so, JD, aren't you proud of Jimmy too? He's like, So it's kind of this in his way. I hate excusing that behavior. It's like, damn it, if you're proud, you say, I'm really proud of you. And I've never heard that.
Yeah. Well, you should be proud because you're reaching so many people. I said you were one of the first people that I became aware of who was, talking about low carb, and all these years later, you're still doing it and still changing people's lives. So I appreciate all you're doing and your willingness to be so open with your audience. Yeah, thank you. This is the first time I've done this, so I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for doing this.
Are you done already?
Yeah. I got to pick up my son from camp. So
there you go. Well, I'm going to give a plug for your book while we're still here.
Yeah.
Guys, go get Ravenous, Otto Warburg story by this guy here, Sam Apple. That's him. And really good. I interviewed you recently on my show, so I really enjoyed that. And that was over. You're like, can I interview you? I'm like, yeah, sure.
Yeah. This is my natural role on the other side. I feel very uncomfortable being interviewed. This is
along. like being the interviewee. It took me, because I've interviewed for years. And so then I got on the other end of it. I'm like, hey, I got knowledge too that's to share. So it was kind of cool.
Yeah, well, this is great, and I hope we can stay in touch.
Thank you, Sam. And guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll be back again soon.